So prior to running for Congress, I spent my whole career as an entrepreneur in the private sector. I started 2 businesses, took them public on the New York Stock Exchange. It was a wonderful experience, particularly for the son of a union electrician whose parents never went to college. But one of the lessons I learned from my business career as I traveled around the country and around the world for that matter, is that whenever I found a good economy, I would also find a situation where the government, the nonprofit community, and the private sector were working well together. When these 3 stakeholders work together against a common good or for the common cause, you get good outcome for all the citizens. When they work in opposition, you get really bad outcomes. So let's think about this in the context of the world that we have today. The world is fundamentally changing. Technological innovation, global interconnection are changing our economy and changing the face of the global economy. This has helped many people. It's lifted billions of people out of poverty. But it's hurt many people as well, including many Americans who face uncertainty in the job market, pressure on their wages because of disruption, a declining standard of living. We haven't done enough to help these people to level the playing field. In fact, if we want to make a difference against the real generational challenges that we have as a society right now, poverty, educational inequality, climate, the growing opportunity gap, if we want to make a difference against these things, we not only need new ideas, but we need a new sense of collaboration between all the stakeholders, the government, the nonprofit community, and the private sector. And that animates the work I do in Congress. And I come at this from the perspective of someone who believes government should play an active role in improving people's lives. But I also believe government can't and shouldn't do it alone. And part of the reason I say that is because government right now has 3 challenges. First, it has a funding challenge. Because of the condition of the federal budget and so many budgets around this country at the state level, government really is not in a position to make investments. And you can't drive transformative change unless you can invest. That's our first problem. Our second problem is an innovation problem. Right? Let's face it, the government's never been great at innovation. But if you think about what's going on outside of government right now, you realize the gap is growing. And our third problem is what I'll call kind of a transparency or a metrics problem. We're very good at government at talking about what we do, but we're not so good about talking about the outcomes, which creates a very positive feedback loop if you do that. So let's think about these problems in the context of a real-world example. Let's use asthma as an example. So 25 million Americans are affected by asthma. Asthma episodes cause 2 million emergency room visits, 500,000 hospitalizations. Our kids miss 14 million days of school because of asthma. It's the #1 reason that younger children have school absentees. And Americans miss 10 million days of work. It costs us $60 billion a year as a nation. But I bet you didn't know that 40% of asthma episodes are triggered by what's called housing triggers. These are relatively simple things in the homes, mold, pet hair, insects, chemicals, that trigger these episodes, mostly, quite frankly, among poor people. The data suggests that each asthma episode costs us $10,000 as a nation. But the data also suggests that if we invest $2,500 or less in these homes, we can remediate the situation. If you extrapolate that across the population and look at the numbers, it's an incredibly good return on investment. So what the government should be doing is taking the Medicaid population, which is the poor people that we provide health care to, that have asthma. And we should be doing innovative things to intervene in the home and prevent these housing triggers. It would be really good for them, and it would be really good for the bottom line of the country. But the problem is we can't because of the 3 problems I talked about. We can't make the investment. So many important government programs right now are strained, and they need more funding, let alone talk about new investments. Really hard to do. Secondly, it takes innovation. You really need new strategies to try to change behavior and fix things in the home. And you want metrics, you want data, you want to see that it's working. But what government can do is embrace a form of contracting called pay for success, which is when government partners with nonprofits to try to make a difference against important issues of society. Let me explain how pay for success works for asthma. So the government would contract with a nonprofit to manage the Medicaid asthma population, to intervene in the home and come up with creative ways to change the behavior and change things in the home. The government wouldn't pay the nonprofit anything unless and only if the nonprofit were to demonstrate that over time, hospitalizations related to asthma episodes went down materially in the population. And then the government would make a success payment to the nonprofit only if the numbers were hit and calculated to be less than the government would have paid otherwise, which sounds very fiscally responsible. How does the nonprofit afford to do this, right? Because it takes an investment. The nonprofit issues something called a social impact bond to a philanthropist. The philanthropist buys the bond, puts up the risk capital, probably gets involved in the program, and if the nonprofit hits its numbers, gets the success payment, then the nonprofit pays back the bond, and then the philanthropist can reinvest that money in some other important thing in society. So you see how this approach can get at the three problems government has. It solves the funding problem, solves the innovation problems, and it will create a lot of data. Whether it be for asthma or any of the number of other ills that face our society right now, Pay for Success and Social Impact Bond can utterly transform how the government tackles these issues, and it can materially expand the resources available for investment. Because if philanthropists can give their money and get it back, guess what? They'll give more. And this is very bipartisan. Democratic states are doing these programs. Republican states like Utah are really innovators on this. I have a colleague on the other side of the aisle, a Republican from Indiana, Todd Young. He and I have a bipartisan bill in the Congress to allow more governments to do this. This is very, very bipartisan. So my call to action here today is for us to put aside the ideological divide that we have right now over the role of government, where my side, the Democrats, think government can solve all problems. And so many of my colleagues, Republicans, think that we want to shrink government or even eliminate government. My call to action is for us to stand up for a smarter government, a government that can intervene and make a difference in people's lives, but is focused on innovation and fiscal responsibility and focused on new ways of delivering its services, whether it be Pay for Success, social impact bonds, or any other form of collaboration that can bring the key stakeholders together, government, nonprofits, and the private sector, to make a difference against these issues. That's how we'll make progress. And quite frankly, I believe it's a way out of this partisan divide. Thank you. God bless you.